Good morning and welcome to my studio. I'm Russell Smith, and today I'd like to share with you a video documenting the underpainting of a large aviation art painting. The painting is a narrative depicting one of two victories scored by Godwin Brumowski, the most successful Austro-Hungarian fighter ace of World War I. Brumowski flew a variety of different aircraft during his wartime career, but his most famous aircraft were the Epic-built Albatros D3s, which he painted red after being inspired by Manfred von Richthofen. Now, when you hear the term underpainting, usually it refers to a very general and sometimes almost abstract initial version of what will become a representational painting. The purpose of it is to establish the basic shapes and values of the composition. However, I do a lot of preliminary work before I ever set a brush to the canvas, so by the time I get to this point, I already have the basic composition worked out. Now, for that reason, I approach my underpainting almost like a plein air painter approaches a canvas, not only blocking in the shapes and values, but also indicating many of the specific details, thus getting it fairly close to what the end result will look like. That way, by the time I come back with subsequent layers, I already have a pretty good idea of exactly what adjustments need to be made. Now, as you'll notice, on day one of the filming, there's a significant glare on the far side of the canvas. My apologies for that. I've got a new lighting setup here in the studio, and I was already through most of that day of filming before I realized that you couldn't see half the canvas. I included that footage anyway, and then adjusted my camera angle on the following days. So for now, let's get to it. When I begin blocking in a painting, I almost always start with the sky. And the reason for that is because the sky sets the tone for the painting. It's where the light comes from, and it dictates the color, the values, and the light direction. In this case, I'm picturing a morning scene, and we're looking north, so the light source, which is the sun, is coming in low over the viewer's right shoulder. I'm actually using two different mixes of blue here. One is a light mix of titanium white and cobalt teal, which I'll use down near the horizon. The other mix, which consists of titanium white and ultramarine blue, is slightly darker, and I'll use it for the upper portions of the sky. Now I'm getting into the clouds. Now here's one thing you have to remember when painting clouds, and that is clouds are not white. I'm actually using a 3-color neutral mix toned down to about a 15% gray. And as I block in the clouds, I don't limit myself by holding the brush only one way. Instead, I'm turning the brush at a variety of different angles as I paint, sometimes using short, choppy strokes, sometimes scrubbing the paint in, and sometimes even rolling the brush as I pull it across the canvas. And that way the paint lays down more randomly and expressively, and it creates a nice mix of different edges and textures. Now, as I said before, once I realized how bad the glare was on the far side of the canvas, I stopped filming. But I did continue painting that day, finishing not only the sky, but also the two airplanes in the background, the victim, an Italian Newport, and also the Albatros D3 flown by Frank Linka Crawford, who shared in that victory that day with Brumowski. Now we're into day two of the painting. Today I'm going to be focusing on the main subject itself, which of course is Brumowski's Albatros. Now I'm going to start up in the engine area because generally speaking that's where your darkest darks can be found. And I want to start with the darkest darks because once those are blocked in, I can key the rest of my values off of that. As you can see, off to my right I have a computer on my painting table on which I can pull up various reference photos as I work. This comes in really handy, and it allows me to have the visual information I need right next to me as I'm working. Now I'm getting into the sunlit areas of the fuselage, and this is where knowledge of the subject really comes in handy. The Albatros D-Series aircraft had molded plywood fuselages, And with the stresses involved with flight and the exposure to the elements, it didn't take long for the plywood to warp and buckle slightly. This, of course, would create a slightly undulating surface which would reflect light in different ways. And the model I use for my lighting reference doesn't show that detail, so I have to create that effect myself. Now it's time to work on the undersurface of the top wing. Now logic might dictate that being in shadow, this would need to be a darker, cooler version of the aircraft color, just like I used in the shadow areas on the fuselage. Quite often though, when viewed from certain angles, the undersurfaces of these upper wings would pick up warm reflections of light and color from the fuselage and create some really nice effects. Days 3 and 4. Now it's time to work on the ground. I've saved the ground for last because of all the elements in the painting. This part is the least important in that it doesn't affect the other elements. It doesn't define the light like the sky does, and it isn't the subject like the airplanes are. It does have its own important part to play though, because the ground supports the subject and the narrative by giving a clear context and setting. I've got a pretty good idea of what I want the landscape to look like, but without an exact photographic reference, defining that look requires me to make a lot of choices as I work. Choices such as color and value, which brushes to use, even what kind of brush strokes would best express what I want. And for that reason, painting the landscape usually takes a little longer than painting the other elements. Brumowski's victory that day occurred near Cortellazzo, Italy, at the mouth of the Piave River where it empties into the Adriatic Sea. The Piave is braided for much of its length, but it turns into a constant wide channel as it nears the coast. Now typically the ground in this area consists of wide, flat fields, but the Austrians had crossed the Piave just a couple of weeks earlier, so I'm not picturing well-groomed fields, but rather fields that have been fought over and starting to show a little bit of neglect. I have some reference photos of that area pulled up on the computer, but I'm not copying any of those. In fact, most of them aren't even my photos. They're simply reference photos that I found on the internet. I really just want to simulate the look and feel of the elements in these photos and try to translate that into my own composition. So there it is, 4 full days of work to create an underpainting for a 20 by 34 canvas. On a project like this, by the time I reach a stopping point, I feel like I've run a race. However, I'm satisfied that a majority of the compositional elements have been worked out to the point that when I come back to the painting in a couple of weeks, I can come back to it with a fresh set of eyes, and I won't have a lot of decision making still to do. Sure, there are going to be adjustments that need to be made and even spots that I might change. But I can rest assured that at this point, I can give my full consideration to those areas while the rest of the painting kind of takes care of itself. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and I hope this video was informative and helpful.